Hello. Welcome to London Roller Derby Ref School session 6. I am Cluster Schmuck, or Dahlia, and I am the head ref of London Roller Derby.
And hello, I am Feminist Killjoy, or Tem. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a roller derby referee based in Glasgow, Scotland.
As always, we're just going to start with a quick background as to who we are talking to. About a third of the people here are already an official. About a third don't know anything at all, may not have even seen a game of roller derby and are here to learn. And a third, well, 22.4%, I'm going to go with a third. I know it's off by quite a lot. Are players who are not interested in being an official, but feel that learning the rules and understanding that kind of official dynamic better would help them. And also there are over 30 countries represented. So Tem and I are coming from this in a very European perspective, although we've officiated many other places around the world, but that I think is important to contextualize ourselves. So over the last few weeks, we have covered a lot of stuff. We have covered a variety of the penalties, things about the engagement zone and pack definition. And last week, we covered OPRing, outside pack reffing, as well as some penalties like direction and multiplayer. There are some updates. One is a few people have told us that they don't like Facebook and that having something in one place would be helpful, and we thought it would be helpful to have something in one place as well. So if you're ever interested, or you're someone who doesn't like Facebook, you can find all the resources and all the links on the website that between kind of Holtz and Owen, the two mods today who will help with all your questions, they created officiallyawesome.uk, which also has some links to external sites, such as the new Ultimate Roller Derby Simulator, created by the wonderful Wonder Zebra from Vienna Roller Derby, previously known as Eurodum. There has been a name change to Nerds. We like it a lot. And the link is both nerds.space as well as on officiallyawesome.uk. And another announcement is that we're going to make Ref School 9 weeks. There are a few reasons for that, but that does mean that the last session is going to be Sunday, June 14th. Tem and I have spoken about having some kind of smaller breakout sessions about particular things possibly. But yeah, this will be a 9-week course. Tem, do you want to give an introduction before we go over, or do you want to go straight to Mentimeter?
Let's go straight to it. Get over to Mentimeter.
Oh.
Whoop! Spoilers.
Yep, spoilers. Sorry, I'm very bad at this. There you go.
Oh, yep. Okay, so we have some questions here on Mentimeter, just to get our heads around our main topic for today, which is the role of the head referee. And we're also going to go into some of the penalties that a head referee is often quite responsible for, but that will be relevant for everyone as well. So the first question, if anyone is able to get into Mentimeter and put in some responses, is what do you think of when you hear head referee? All-knowing, knowledgeable, overseeing, responsible, fair, the boss, or responsible. So yeah, responsible, which seems to be a thing that a lot of people have said, is kind of the main thing. The head referee is fundamentally responsible for holding the space in which roller derby happens, which is a concept we've talked about kind of a lot in the past. So having that responsibility for the overall facilitation means that the role of a head referee is quite different to the other referee roles. I'm gonna skip to the next question. On that note, what skills do you think a head referee needs? And maybe specifically, what skills do you think a head referee needs that are slightly different than ones in some of the other roles that we've talked about? like this: confidence and communication, leadership, multitasking. Yeah. So on the one hand, we have a lot of things that involve kind of experience and knowledge and things that come with practice. But on the other side, there's quite a different set of skills involving communication, multitasking, problem solving, people skills, being calm under pressure, this kind of stuff. And that's why it's really important for us to try and express that the role of head referee is not necessarily a linear progression from the other referee positions. And a lot of time there is this cultural idea that you start as a regular referee, and then as you get better, eventually someone gives you the opportunity to be a head referee. And if you don't take that opportunity, then you're not growing. And if you do take that opportunity and you are a good head referee, then that's what you must do forever. And actually that's just really not true. It's quite a different role. It has different things involved. Some people are very, very suited for leadership, the people management, the game flow, that kind of responsibility aspect of stuff. And some people are not so suited to it. So there are different skills and experience required, both between the different kind of positions, but also in different contexts. The role of the head referee is very different in a tournament context than it might be in a kind of fundraiser, single header context. So how do you even become a head referee? Ooh. Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, this is what I was just saying. Good leadership involves a whole lot of listening, and a genuine commitment to building relationships. So those people skills are very important, and you have to have your ears open at all times. So yeah, becoming a head referee. Often this is a process that happens through application. So that's the next slide. Oh, do you want to do a quick run through, Dahlia, of the different pre-game things?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we're going to be talking about. One is how do you apply to be a head ref? One is how do you then select your crew? How do you build crew morale? Who else do you need to be coordinating with? And then your captain's meeting and your officials meeting. That's kind of all the stuff that happens pre-game.
Great. So yeah, the first point, how do you even become a head referee? How do you apply to become a head referee? Now, sometimes it is an application process, and sometimes there is no application involved. Someone will just send you a desperate Facebook message or email saying, please come do this thing. And really, there's a whole spectrum of ways that you can end up being a head referee. But it is true that sometimes you really do need to go out and actively seek it. So if you are looking for opportunities to be a head referee, go on forums, governing body forums, local officiating forums, Facebook groups. I don't want to promote too much specific social media, but the truth is that a lot of recruitment for roller derby games happens in recruitment groups on Facebook. There are regional recruitment groups for places all over the world, and getting yourself involved in those groups means you'll see the applications. The other thing you can do is reach out directly to people you know who are head referees with leagues, or people who have staffing responsibilities for local games. Ask them to consider you, send them your games history, tell them what you're working on. Like use full qualitative sentences to describe your skills and also your goals. And this is true if you're writing an application or if you're writing an email to someone directly. If someone doesn't know you and they're trying to decide whether or not you're suitable for a head referee position, the things you say about yourself and how you say them really matter. And sometimes that's all they have to go on. The other thing they have to go on is references. So if you fill in an application and you're asked to provide references, make sure that you've picked someone who's actually willing to write some meaningful things about you. So many times I open up applications and the references just say, yep, they can do it. And maybe that's true, but it doesn't instill me with a whole lot of extra information or confidence if I'm selecting. Yeah, and make sure your game history is accessible and up to date. You're just trying to give as clear a picture as possible to the people who might be selecting you of all the different factors that might make you suitable for this position. And over to you.
So then how do you select a crew? Everything we're saying here is so dependent on the situation that you're in. If you are in a really small league or in an area that barely has enough officials who are dedicated to being an official to crew, it, as Tem said, you might just get that kind of desperate message being like, hello, please come help, I'd really appreciate it. But it really does vary. And it also varies depending on whether you're selecting a crew for like 1 or 2 games versus a tournament. Something we haven't spoken a lot about that Tem just messaged is your roller derby CV. We'll be talking a bit about that in the final week, about kind of what next. I know that I didn't have a roller derby kind of history or CV until I'd been officiating for quite a while. It hadn't really been mentioned to me. If you don't have one right now, the thing I would say is start recording, just writing down yourself or set one up, what games you're doing, who's playing, who the head ref was, who the head NSO was, and what the date was, and then eventually you can put it into the kind of the more official CV. In terms of selecting a crew, for single headers, it might be there are just some people around. Ideally, you'll look at their CV and you'll say, this is where they've had experience, this is what happens, and you'll put them into a place. But otherwise, I always like to check in with people's references and see what they have to say on the matter. And then it depends on how formal you want it to be. If it's a single header and you're pretty desperate, you may not want to have like a ton of questions that are compulsory for someone to answer, but actually having an understanding about what people's preferences are, what they would really like to do, what they wouldn't, is helpful. And there are loads of templates that other officials from other leagues can send you if you don't have one yourself for a form, if that feels necessary. In terms of building your crew morale, so you've selected your crew, you've decided this is the positions that they should be in, you've let them know. I often set up like a Facebook group or an event. It can sometimes be crew only, like ref crew only. Sometimes it's all officials. And you start getting people excited, telling them about the game, making sure that people know what's happening, how they can get there, what food is going to be supplied, you know, what nutrition the league are going to give you, hopefully, and start building that kind of excitement. And for me, a crew where people feel like they can ask questions and see what's going on, really. Who else do you need to coordinate with? So pre-game, who else do you need to coordinate with? The league, so the people running it, which may be your own league, which might be easier, or it might be another league who you've been invited to head ref for. And then also the head NSO, making sure that things are coordinated when you might be having an officials meeting. You want to start, particularly for tournaments, it's not always usually, I think, essential for a single double header, connecting officials, ref officials, skating officials to the non-skating officials where their roles are complementary and kind of essential to be a bit more coordinated. And as a head ref, you will want to talk to the NSO who is titled Jam Timer, because there's a lot of things that actually, that when you have good coordination between your Jam Timer, about things about when to start after timeouts, when, like, how whistles should go and that kind of stuff can be really helpful. Ooh. Then captain's meeting. So there are 2 meetings that you will have before the game. One is a captain's meeting and one is an officials meeting. For the captain's meeting, I literally, and I'm very happy to send it out, I literally have a list on my phone of all the things I want to check, and I have like little tip boxes on them because I don't want to ever forget something. But the general purpose of a captain's meeting, I think, and Tem potentially has different and more ideas on it, but I think the purpose of the captain's meeting is...
I literally just used your list that you sent me, so you can speak.
Yeah, but I think in terms of the purpose, I think the purpose is to reassure the teams, like having a confident and someone like head NSO, head ref going, this is how this game's going to run. And actually you feeling confident about what you're saying, even if what you're saying is, our officials are growing. There are going to be things here that they might be learning that may not go right. Will reassure the teams that actually that's acknowledged, that's known. And I think it enables for a clearer and better set expectations. So I think the captain's meeting is really about setting expectations. So a few things that you do, and I'm going over this pretty quickly because actually I'm happy to talk to anyone who would like to talk about captain's meetings and officials meetings in more depth another time. You check uniforms and helmet covers and identifiers. You need to make sure that everything is contrasting, that they are wearing the uniform that you expect them to have. The worst conversations are when people turn up and they're like, oh, I didn't realize, and you have two teams both wearing white, or you have teams in which it's just not a good enough contrast, or uniforms, and this is a pet peeve of mine, uniforms that have about 4 different colors on them, and then it's just challenging. And if there are players watching, please consider your uniforms. There are some really good blogs. Skew has a good blog out there for good uniforms to help officials out. Then you also talk about the venue layout, so where the penalty boxes are, where their benches are, where the medics are, all that kind of stuff. You talk about official reviews, kind of what your expectations are, just to make sure it's really clear. And then other expectations around communication. And actually, I'm going to look at my list about that just to kind of make sure that I say everything. So I always say in my captain's meetings that I am happy for anyone to come and ask any referee any questions, ideally yes or no questions. If they get more complicated, they should probably come to me. If a coach gets stuck in the middle, what are you going to do? I often say they can stay in the middle. They should not be coaching, but if they try to leave and they in the middle of a jam and they get in someone's way, there will be a penalty. That is dangerous. But a lot of my captain's meeting try to fill people with confidence that they can use their own discretion about what safety is, and that they are adults in that way. We reassure them that we're going to call penalties loudly and clearly, and if they can't, if they have any feedback, to let me know. I state that we use gender neutral language, so we won't say she said this or they said that or he, whatever, that we say skater orange 1-2 did this. And I also clarify a new policy that you may or may not be aware of that the WFTDA has implemented around what to do if you call a skater by the color of their skin rather than the color of their shirt. And I go through that with them so they understand what the expectations are. And that if we don't meet those standards that the WFTDA has set, and I say these in single headers or tournaments, whether they're regulation or sanctioned, I make sure I say that. And then any other questions that they may have. And actually the officials meeting, this is going really well. The officials meeting is really similar around what I expect, but the thing that I add is I tell them if there's been anything in the captain's meeting, but I also try to really emphasize to them an importance around composure. I always find that a calm ref crew, a calm NSO crew, even if everything around you feels like the building is burning, can really help calm the game as well. So my officials meeting is actually relatively similar around talking about kind of expectations around communication, making sure that the OPRs are talking to the jam refs, and actually during the game we'll talk a bit about kind of what you do for that as well. But it's a very similar process actually. Tam, I think you're muted.
Yes, okay. I think it's all right now. So what happens during the game, after you've had all these meetings, you've got everyone on the same page, you then have a number of responsibilities during the game itself. As we said, you're fundamentally responsible for holding the structure of the game. And we've seen previously that the game structure penalties include things like pack, illegal position, the engagement zone, interfering with the flow of the game, and sort of clock management type penalties. So that's why the head referee is usually an inside pack referee, usually the rear inside pack referee, and has a sort of main responsibility for defining the engagement zone. They also have a lot of responsibility around clock management, communicating with the jam timer and head NSO, communicating with teams and officials for any team timeouts, official reviews, trying to keep the game running smoothly. It's important to note that that doesn't mean that you should have as little stoppage as possible. Sometimes situations arise that they really necessitate being talked about, and it's important to take that time when it's needed. You need to be on top of keeping things moving without sacrificing the game flow in terms of how it feels to be in the game. If people are being cut off, if your officials are being cut off every time they try and talk about a situation, things are going to become disjointed, and you're going to have more things coming up that make necessary game stoppage because you didn't take the time to cover something that really needed checking out. You're also the primary point of contact for the teams in terms of talking to the officials. Often teams and skaters find it much easier to identify and remember the head referee than the head NSO, which is, an issue in its own thing. But it is true that even if both of those officials are at a captain's meeting, if a team alternate or captain has a general officiating question, they will often approach the head referee first. So you need to have those people skills of being approachable, facilitating the conversation, as well as facilitating the performance of the officials on your crew. As a head referee, not only are the teams looking to you, the rest of your officiating crew is looking to you as well for feedback, for support, and for elevating everyone around you to hold that game as best as possible. And these pictures here by Floyd King and Marco, lovely Marco from Finland, are two pictures actually of me head reffing in Helsinki, and just showing how all the different ways, the different conversations that skaters and alternates try and have with you, and the different kind of tone that can accompany those conversations. Back to you, Dalia.
So between jams, a few things you'll want to be doing. You want to look to see if bench staff want to talk to you. They will often make that really clear by walking into the middle, but it is worth you looking to see if they do. It shouldn't distract you from other things. So you also need to be trying to be aware of, are the jam refs doing what they need to be doing? Are people kind of getting back into position? Who's in the penalty box? Who is due for the queue, which the NSOs will help you with as well. Although often the OPRs are more aware of that, but it helps you out. And who's on track and where are they on track? Are the jammers in place? Are the pivots where they're meant to be? The blockers? Is someone about to false start? So that's kind of the stuff that between jams you want to keep an eye out for. That's an empty. So then at half time, actually, so during the jam, if something were to happen, if someone were to get injured, if the scoreboard has completely gone inaccurate, you should stop the jam. If there's an injury, any referee can also decide to stop the jam for kind of safety reasons and for injury. But it's also, the scoreboard is something that the jam timer will let you know if there is a really big issue going on, and it is fair to stop the jam due to that. At half time, it is always good to go up to each bench coach and say, how do you feel we are doing? Do you have any particular feedback? Sometimes I want to do this together. Often they're doing it as you swap benches. And then 5 to 10 minutes before the next half starts, you sit down and you as a head ref work out when and what feedback you should be giving back to your crew. And I think it's really important to think about, when is the feedback going to be helpful? If someone's really out of position and you know that they're a better skater than that and they can do it, tell them that. If someone's really out of position and you know they're quite new, it might be worth at half time saying, right now what you're doing is good enough. I understand why you're doing it. This is what good would look like. It might be that you know that person well enough that you do it right near the end, or message them another time. I always ask, and it's something I forgot in my officials meeting, how do people like to receive feedback? Because I think that's an important conversation. We can be really afraid of giving feedback, whether it be really positive feedback about something they're doing well, or feedback about how someone can improve. So I think it's really important to ask that question in order to create an environment where you can give it and someone doesn't think that you're just calling them rubbish and think they're the worst. My thing is that feedback is a gift, and you don't give feedback to someone you think can't improve and isn't worth your time. And then post-game, really quickly, if it's a tournament, you will think about how you want to frame each game for your crew. But if it's a single double header after the game, you'll probably just want to check in, see that everyone's doing all right, and then they'll go off home. 10.
Great, thank you. Quickly, before I move on here, I will just address something in the chat about what kind of injuries might lead to stopping the jam. And I think it's true that any injury really can lead to stopping the jam. What you're particularly looking for is any injury that results in a skater not being able to remove themselves from gameplay. If a skater can't get out of the OPR lane, can't get off the track, can't be no longer involved in the jam in any active way, in a way that if an audience member or a small child were vulnerable in that position, you would stop the jam. So any skater who's injured and can't leave, I would stop the jam there. and any kind of significant impact to the head or spine or any of those kind of things that would lead to potential serious danger. I'm sorry, there is a small child who is currently crying for me quite desperately, so I am just going to disappear for one moment. Dahlia, could you quickly speak? I will be right back.
I can quickly speak. Okay, so penalty spotlight, interfering with the flow of the game. So what's interesting about interfering with the flow of the game is that teams, in the rules, it really explicitly says that teams and officials should make every effort to ensure that the period clock runs according to the rules of the game and that the jam starts and ends as specified in the rules, which is really nice, I think, because it really says that there should be an element of teamwork and that level of communication should really be happening between the two. And so a few different things that this can mean. Actually, let's the next slide. Yes, and Thames set it up like this. Okay, so a few things this mean is skaters queued for the penalty box who aren't on the track at the jam start. That is an issue, and if they aren't, there will be a penalty. No blockers from one team on the track at the jam start, which you think would not happen, but it definitely does, where for some reason they're not there. If there is one blocker there and a jammer, you can get going. But if there are no blockers, you know, it's an issue. All blockers from one team entirely out of position at the jam start. Either team not fielding a jammer for the jam. Roller derby needs jammers in order to have fun, and it's not fun if one team just has 2 minutes of solid jamming. And so that's why if they don't field a jammer at all, then there's a penalty awarded to the captain. A team fielding too many skaters during a jam, which results in an advantage that cannot be removed by the removal of extra skaters. So sometimes, you know, they'll not know someone's in the penalty box, and someone can say, and you know, it'll literally just be the skater that's closest to you or the skater that you saw come on last. Red 3-1, return to your bench. And at that point, there shouldn't be a penalty. It happens. It's not done. It's not had any impact. But if it has created an impact, then there should be a penalty. Tem, would you like to continue? No? Okay. A team successfully requesting a team timeout when they have none remaining. What that means is it is everyone's responsibility to be aware of how many timeouts you have, and we're going to talk specifically about team timeouts, official timeouts, and official reviews a bit later. But actually, if you do call one and you don't have any remaining and it does get delayed, that is your responsibility to be aware of it. A team member who is neither the captain nor the designated alternate successfully requesting a team timeout or official review. We've not really spoken about captains or designated alternates. Captains are usually one of the players. I don't know if they have to be. I cannot remember the rules well enough, to be honest. Designated alternate can be someone who is playing, can be on the track, or it can be a member of the bench coach, and they will have an A somewhere on them. It might be on their arm, it's sometimes on their hand, sometimes it's on their leg. I would recommend that the jam timer and the head ref make sure they introduce themselves to both of those people beforehand, because they are the only two people who can call a team timeout or an official review. So knowing who they are can help the officials not accidentally call one, even if you've got a random blocker kind of, you know, being like, timeout. And that's the signal. If you want a timeout for a team timeout, that's a signal for an official review. I think I'm going into some of the next session, but I get, as a jam timer, I get very excited about these things. Yeah. Anything to add on any of that I rambled on?
Yes. Sorry for disappearing there briefly. Yeah, the one thing that I would like to add is that often these things are not intentional. No one is like specifically trying to not cue themselves for the penalty box when, you know, they've just left the track and they've sat down and they haven't remembered that fact. But in the same way that we've said before that we can't judge intention, we can't judge what's going on in people's heads and why they might be doing something. but we can judge whether someone has deliberately done something physically. And so if a skater has or has not put themselves on the track, if a skater has or has not made this signal to a referee, those kind of physical actions can be considered deliberate, whether or not the actual illegality of that thing is intentional or not. And we'll see that as a feature of a lot of the penalties that we'll talk about today.
So, scenario. I have to apologise. This week, I did not get the polls ready in Zoom. So what happens next is going to be real vague. But a scenario. Jam 23. So each jam is numbered. So we've got jam number 1, which is the first jam of the game, 2, 3, 4, etc. So jam 23 is called off for an injury sustained by white pivot. The same skater lines up on the track for the start of jam 26. What do you think happens next? The thing, we have mentioned this rule before. I'm going to give some of it away because I feel like that's only fair. That you're meant to stay off the jam if you get injured. If a jam is called off due to an injury, you're meant to stay off for 3 jams. So what happens next? I'll give you some options. Let's see if I can remember any of them. Option A, white pivot is immediately given a penalty. The jam is called and white pivot is given a penalty. Option B, the jam is called and white captain is immediately given a penalty. Option C, no one is given a penalty. And option D, other. If you want to, you can write them in the group chat and we'll just keep an eye on them. So, oh wow. If you've written other, what is the other, do you think? Warning, okay. So it says jam 3 is called off for an injury sustained. The same skater lines up on the track. What happens next? If the jam
I think in terms of the jam being called, what we're saying is 4 whistles to indicate the start of an official timeout at the moment that the jam start whistle would have gone. The jam 26 has not begun.
So the officials should attempt to communicate to the white skater that they are not allowed to participate. If the official fails, right? So they've said, was it the white pivot? Yeah, white pivot, please return to your bench. If they do not do that, when 30 seconds has passed since the end of the previous jam, officials must call an official timeout instead of starting the next jam. The white pivot is returned to their team bench to sit out the remaining jam as required, and the white captain is penalised. So I think that was B, and I think most of you were saying B, which is great. The rationale is the white skater's failure to sit out the required number of jams prevented the next jam from starting in a timely manner. The white skater can't serve the penalty themselves because they are still technically on an injury leave. So the penalty of delay of game is issued to the captain instead. Keep in mind, if officials believe the white skater's injury poses a serious and immediate threat to that skater or others, officials should not allow the white skater to skate no matter how many jams have elapsed. That's a really important thing. If you feel that a skater, and when I say you feel, this should be generally informed by the medics and then you implementing that. But actually, if you feel that a skater has an injury that means that they should not be on after 3, that they need more time, or they say, you know what, I need more time, then that 3 minimum is a minimum, it's not a maximum. And that's really important to think about. 10.
Yeah, also quickly to be clear, the penalty we're discussing here is interference, which has the penalty code N, and is the penalty for interfering with the flow of the game. And that previous example would also use the standardized cue delay of game. The delay of game is an interference penalty.
What's the hand signal for that, Tem?
That one.
Oh, okay, one second. I don't know if you can see it. Shall I try and do it? I don't know.
Yeah.
So
You can't see my arm.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's a kind of downward interference kind of motion.
Okay, let's do another scenario.
One second.
Sorry.
There was a question about, does that mean the white team could still field an additional blocker because the pivot has to sit out? So the white team now has someone sitting in the penalty box. So at that point, they could have someone go in as a pivot if they wanted to and they had enough time to do that, but they would have someone in the penalty box. So then it would be however many other blockers they were allowed, or pivots they were allowed to have on the track, if there was no one else in the penalty box.
Great.
Back to you, Tam.
Okay, so scenario C4.2.3.H. White pivot, who is neither the captain nor the designated alternate, uses hand signals to communicate with their captain, asking for a team timeout to be called. Officials, mistaking the white pivot's hand signals for a legal request, call a team timeout. What happens next here? Some of the options, let's go with A. White pivot is penalised for illegally causing a clock stoppage. The captain is penalised for illegally causing a clock stoppage. The team timeout is called and there's no penalty, it's legal, or something else. Okay, quite a lot of people here in the chat so far would go with penalising either the pivot or the captain. The answer is actually that there is no penalty to be assessed in this situation. The penalty for illegally causing a clock stoppage is for a skater who illegally requests this. Now, in this situation, the white pivot is not considered to have requested a timeout because they haven't directly approached an official to do so. They're simply communicating with their captain and using those hand signals. So when the mistake is realized, officials must call an official timeout. The white pivot is not issued a penalty. They're not charged a team timeout. And the next jam is started as soon as possible, but at least 30 seconds after the end of the previous jam. And yeah, the reason is they were just trying to talk to their captain. The official who called that timeout for them shouldn't really have been inserting themselves into that conversation. Now, if that white pivot at any point made direct eye contact with an official while also talking with their captain, if there's any doubt, if they're really looking directly at an official, then I would consider that requesting that official. But if they're not actually even looking or paying any attention to the officials shouldn't assume that a request is being made.
Sorry, I was muted. It's weird, you know, we're how many months into lockdown and I'm still like, oh, I'm muted. It's like some sort of weird Zoom meme. So, misconduct. Misconduct's a really interesting penalty because there are some things that are quite specific about it that Tem will go into in a moment. But then it's also slightly like an umbrella penalty where you have to use your discretion. And it means that actually, in some ways, you do need to understand parts to do with the culture and these really untangible things of roller derby. But you also need to understand in some ways, like what you think fairness is, which sounds strange, but it does depend on the situation that's happening. But when I say umbrella, what I mean is that the rules can be really interesting about swearing, for example, and like, is that allowed? Is it not allowed? When is it allowed? And you can definitely have experiences where there are officials on power trips and like there are misconducts going here, there, and everywhere. But you can also have to have good conversations to understand why is this particular action impacting that official so much and what is happening and what's going on there. So Tem's going to go into a bit more detail about misconduct because they're pretty all-encompassing in some ways. Tem.
Yes, perfect. So there are some specific situations that constitute misconduct penalties. And let's bear in mind again, as I was saying about some of the interference penalties, that we are using the word intentional in the rules here and in the description of some of these games, but we're talking about intention as in is this action physically deliberate? Is there muscular engagement? Is it intentional in terms of what is actually happening? We're not talking about intention in terms of what is the goal, what is the considered outcome of this thing. So just consider that in mind. So the first thing, profane, abusive, and obscene language. So this is illegal. Sometimes it only really warrants a warning. Sometimes it should be immediately penalized. The things to consider is who hears it, who is it directed at, how extensive is the language. It does say clearly in the rules that roller derby is a high adrenaline sport, and sometimes aggressive language exists, but there are some lines, and those are delineated in the casebook quite simply. Intentional, unsporting blocking or contact that doesn't meet the usual impact spectrum for penalization. So things like positional blocks that limit an opponent's fundamental participation in the game. So I've seen, for example, a skater stand behind another skater and put their hands around in front of their eyes. There's no actual block here, there's no contact, but positionally, these hands are preventing that skater from fundamentally playing roller derby, and that would be a misconduct penalty. Similarly, dancing on the edge of the track, preventing someone from re-entering legally without hitting you, positionally blocking with the head, offering your head to an opponent, so that's the only place they could hit you. Things that just stop someone from playing roller derby without you actually meeting the impact spectrum for a contact penalty. Intentional falling on top of a downed skater. So there's a casebook scenario for this that is very simply, and intentional is what I was saying there as well. We don't really care why, and we can't assume why. We can't imagine why someone is necessarily falling on top of someone else. But if there is a deliberate physical action where a skater who is in control of themselves goes from being standing to blocking a legal target zone on someone who is down and falling on top of them, that's a misconduct penalty. Concealing the star. Again, we're not interested in why, sorry, I missed one here. Intentional or negligent contact to an official. That's the same point, really. We're talking about intentional as in physically, is this person in control, or are they paying enough attention to the situation to be in control if they're trying? And contact to an official happens a lot in roller derby. Incidental contact is just a part of the game and it shouldn't be penalized. I think some officials are very over-eager to call expulsions and so on for contact to an official. Often I think it's unnecessary, but we are looking for a situation when a skater is in control of their own movement and makes intentional or negligent contact to an official. Concealing the star. So for concealing the star, again, we're talking about the deliberate action of hiding or failing to reveal a star after being warned by an official or asked to show the star. Again, we're not interested in why, but if a skater takes the helmet cover off and puts it inside their shirt or tucks it in a pocket or something, that's a deliberate action that is out to deceive. On deception, again, we have impersonating, deceiving, or ignoring officials. So impersonating, there's a casebook example of one team skater in the penalty box delivering the penalty release verbal cue for an opposing team skater in the penalty box, impersonating the NSO, whose job it would be to do that, trying to get that player to get a penalty for leaving the box early, and deceiving or ignoring an official would lead us to a kind of insubordination penalty for failure to leave the track. Now, insubordination is a subset. I think on the next slide, if we go to that, insubordination is a subset of misconduct penalties, a standardized cue that is used for misconduct penalties where the unsporting conduct is specifically disrespectful to officials. So the first 2 points here, profane and abusive and obscene language directed at officials rather than at teammates or audience or anything, and ignoring or deceiving officials are insubordination penalties. Now the last one here, failure to leave the track after having been issued a penalty, is another example of one of those intentional unsporting conduct actions that actually often happens very accidentally. A lot of the time, skaters who are given insubordination penalties are not deliberately trying to cut the lap distance short, aren't deliberately failing to leave the track. But what they are doing is deliberately moving their body and being in full control of their body and failing to leave the track after having been issued a penalty. If a skater's not in control, if they're flailing and then they establish themselves and then they're able to leave the track, and it takes them quite a while to do it, this isn't an insubordination penalty. But a situation where a skater deliberately skates along and just hasn't realized that they're still inside the track boundary, but manages to skate the full length of the straightaway before leading to the penalty box, this is insubordination. So I think a lot of the time there's a kind of emotional judgment. There's a vibe around the idea of insubordination where skaters can get quite defensive and upset that they're being told that they were insubordinate, because I think it is a kind of, it's a horrific term. I think it supports a kind of authoritarian model of officiating that I'm not particularly into. But it's really important to remember that insubordination is about the deliberate physical action rather than any kind of internal intentionality. No one wants to be given a misconduct penalty, but often it's not for actually being someone who is being unsporting.
So we have a scenario for you. Once again, we have amazing pictures from Ethnic, so thank you very much. Derby name, nickname. I don't know if I'm saying ethnic correctly. Red blocker knocks down white blocker. Red blocker bends over at the waist, positioning their chest above white blocker in such a way as to prevent white blocker from standing. Okay, so what do you think happens? A, nothing, there is no penalty. B, red blocker is given a warning to move. C, red blocker is given a penalty. A, B, or C? Okay, we are getting 90-ish plus% of C, which is that red blocker gets a penalty and they are penalized. Though most positional blocks don't typically result in a penalty, in this instance, red blocker intentionally positionally blocks a downed opponent. White blocker cannot initiate a block from a downed status and thus cannot re-establish their position without earning a penalty of their own. This is unsporting conduct, and this is unsporting conduct on the part of red blocker. Because as you may remember when we previously spoke about when the skater is down, when you're down, you can't block. And so at that point, what red blocker is doing is they're basically preventing you from playing roller derby, which is why red would get a penalty. Tem.
Yes, hello. So then our last point really for today around being a head referee, coming away from some of the penalty specifics, are the relationship between the head referee position and something called the GTO. You may or may not be familiar with the role. A GTO, or Games Tournament Oversight, is someone who in WFTDA sanctioned and recognized tournaments exists to uphold various policies and procedures. They take on a lot of responsibilities that culturally and historically have been kind of pushed on a head referee. And it's a really important kind of relationship to understand if you're going to be a head referee. So in some tournaments, there is a GTO, and they take responsibility for broader health and safety, compliance with governing body policy, grievances, conflict resolution. They're a skater advocate. They're responsible for the sanctioning, documentation, score reporting to the governing body for sanctioned games. And basically it's this role that takes a very logistic and managerial approach and does lots of really important behind the scenes work. They're responsible for kind of like track layout and venue layout and all of this kind of stuff, and just trying to make sure that everything is compliant with risk management and all other policies. Now, GTOs don't usually exist on a more local level or in a smaller single header type situation, or at an event that is not a recognized or sanctioned WFTDA tournament. And in those situations, sometimes more and more, thankfully, I'm seeing leagues have in place bout managers, game committees who are responsible for taking on those roles, and it's not just put on the head referee. But historically, there really has been this idea that if something happens if the track's in the wrong place, or if things start flooding, or if there's blood on the track, lots of kind of health and safety and risk management related things, those responsibilities are kind of pushed onto the head referee. So it's really important, if you're going to be the head referee somewhere that you're unfamiliar with, or actually even somewhere you are familiar with, if you find these responsibilities being pushed on you a lot and you would rather they didn't, to kind of set boundaries, set expectations, communicate with the leagues that you're working with, and really try and establish what is expected of you, what are you willing to take on, and which roles and responsibilities really should go to somebody else. You don't have to accept responsibility for blood cleanup, for example. That's not fundamentally part of being a head referee. It doesn't mean that you can't take on those responsibilities in situations where a league doesn't have that kind of staff available. But the main thing is just to know in advance what's your role and what's not. The worst thing is showing up as a head referee, knowing that you need to be there an hour and a half before the game, to get there and realize there's no track because the league assumed that as a head referee, you would be coordinating that. So just talk about what is intended beforehand.
Yeah, and I would add that I often really try to make that clear with leagues. Actually, like, I would like them to be doing the track. I will help as best I can, and then also, like, the blood stuff, I leave it to the league and the medics, because actually they should have the equipment there for me, and that's my opinion, that allows them to do it safely, because blood contamination, all that other kind of stuff is really important, that they take that ownership of the space and understand what's happening. So for me, that's how I deal with it. Before we go on to the final thing, there is one, we will still be doing the half an hour of questions, but there's been a particular question about, can we talk more about the shirt color incorrect call on policy? And I just wanted to talk about it a little bit more. We will be talking a bit more about this, I think, in the kind of next steps of it, but we haven't really raised it a lot, and we should. So in July 2019, the WFTDA released a policy called How to Handle Issues Around Skater Colors and Numbers. And in it, they gave some scenarios around what to do and then how to act. It's really clear in terms of expectations of the officials who called the issue, and the expectations of participation and the expectation of head officials. I'm going to let Tem talk about it, as they helped write it. The thing that I will say is that at LRD, we do a 30-second version of it to all officials. Sometimes if we have skaters officiating throughout it, we literally just say it verbally at the beginning of every scrim, to really make sure they understand the expectations and to help support our skaters of color, particularly understand, like, what London Roller Derby stands for. Tem.
Yeah, sorry, is there a specific question regarding the policy that's been raised?
Can you explain it a bit more? It's much higher up.
Okay, sure. So the main thing is that the emotional and physical well-being of all participants is a priority in roller derby, and that means that skaters from any kind of minority background or group have a fundamental right to have their emotional and physical well-being supported. And microaggressions such as misidentification of skater color or misidentification of gender, for example, is another one, misgendering people. These kind of microaggressions have no place in our sport and have no place as accidents, because just like I was saying that for skaters, there's a difference between intentional action and deliberate action. For officials, it's the same. It doesn't matter whether you accidentally slipped and said some words or not. If you are in control of your mouth and you can form like the shapes of phonetics and you can say words, whatever words you say are deliberate. And so if you say words that are microaggressions, whether you were intentionally offensive or intentionally upsetting anyone or not, you are responsible for those actions. And so the point of this policy is to acknowledge that, one, those mistakes are happening far too often within roller derby, and two, to really lay out the guidelines for who takes the responsibility and who is the one that needs to be apologizing and who needs to take ownership of their actions. So there's basically just a lot of guidance for trying to take ownership of the mistake, if you've made a mistake, to apologize without making excuses, and to really kind of centralize or to really center the experience of the recipient of that microaggression rather than focus on what you intended or what a member of the officiating crew intended.
Thank you very much. If anyone has any other questions on that or wants us to do it in more depth, then please do ask away. So we are coming up to the hour. What scenarios or questions do you have? The next few sessions, we're going to be using some scenarios that we've already created to go into more depth. And actually next week, we're going to have some awesome other officials helping us out, because we're going to use breakout rooms to go in more depth into some scenarios. But we'd really like to know the things that you would like to know more information on. So if you have any questions or scenarios in particular, please go to tiny.cc/LRD questions and let us know, because we would like to use some of those scenarios in a future session. On that note, thank you for being officially awesome, and see you next week. As always, this session is free, but if you have enjoyed it and would like to contribute to London Roller Derby or any of the food banks around where we practice, then please do. In a minute, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to do what we usually have been doing for the last few weeks, and trying to get you to show us all the different penalty signs. So I'm going to stop sharing. Let's see if this works. So we can see everyone. Tem, do you want to go first?
Yes, let's do misconduct. Word of the day, misconduct. This one. So a few people are doing the interference signal that we did kind of push upon you subliminally by doing it in the session. But misconduct is you're sweeping a different part of your body.
Yep. Multiplayer. Yeah. Oh, this is never going to get less satisfying seeing everyone do that. Which people who watch this back on YouTube just won't understand because they only see the person talking. Tem, you'll go.
Official review. Request an official review.
Yes. Team timeout. Official timeout. Official review. Official timeout is what I meant. Official timeout. Amazing. Yeah, that.
Yeah, can I just add quickly that a lot of the time people like do this thing with their official timeout thing. You actually just need to like tap and say, now we're in official timeout, but you can just hold your arms here. So if you're a jam timer and someone's trying to make you do silly things where you have to do this and they make noises every time you do it or anything, you can actually just hold your hand here and you're still doing the official timeout signal. What other things are there? Direction. Yeah.
A few people are doing kind of really big versions of it, and I think it's better to do kind of that version, because actually that can end up being like are you doing a sideways effect? What penalty is that? I need to look in the chat to see if anyone's writing.
Illegal contact.
Illegal positioning.
Illegal contact. That, because you're doing the contacting thing. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just about clarity. I think it doesn't really matter how big you do it, but it's kind of about precision. And I think the size does matter. If you're making this motion really messily and no one's sure if it's direction or illegal position, that's different than if you do your illegal position like this and you do your direction like this. Which way is your elbow moving? Do you have anything else, Dahlia?
Now let's get into the question bit. Let's get into questions. Any tips? Oh, so the next half hour, we're going to do some answers to the questions you've asked throughout the session. At about 1:15, if you have a question that you would rather say with your voice, just say in the comments, and the mods will let us know that you'd like to speak rather than write a question. So one of the questions was, any tips for how to best communicate or manage when head refereeing in a game hosted by another league, so not your home league? I've been in situations where I feel I don't get enough information or feedback from the organisers who are in a different city than myself. Tem, any thoughts?
Sorry.
That's right.
What?
I'll do it. So basically, I think one of the best ways to communicate in some ways is ask them questions, but do it in a way that's considered. So actually have a list of things you want to send them and be like, hey, really excited about this. This is the information I need. So I always try to set the expectations by preventing this from happening by having my own set of questions. And then otherwise, I think it's worth finding someone that you know from the league or not. If you can, I prefer a face-to-face conversation, but just send them an email and be like, this is the stuff that I think would help in future. I don't really believe in like the sandwich feedback model of like good, bad, good. Because I think it makes the good stuff seem fake and the bad stuff seem worse. But I would also try and speak to officials from their league and ask how can I give this feedback back if they have other officials, and use that as a way of kind of understanding where they're coming from. Tem, a question for you. Are there any other things that we missed that a head ref wants to know from bench staff at captain's meeting?
So one of the things that I sometimes ask about is if teams are planning, they have potentially been training some fringe or unusual tactics, trying to catch out kind of loopholes in the rule. I would ask in a captain's meeting that either in that meeting or independently, those coaches kind of approach me and let me know what those situations might be, so that we can be prepared to see them. But also, and more specifically, so that I can be clear about how we will respond to those situations, because there are two things that can go really wrong when teams try some experimental situations. One is the officials aren't prepared and they respond wrongly and do the opposite thing than what the team was expecting. So their thing really backfires. And even though it's an officiating error, there's nothing we can do about it. And if it's very strange, there's not necessarily... it's not necessarily guaranteed that the officials are going to respond in the way they think they would. So either because it's an unfamiliar situation and we do it wrong, or because a team has trained something having interpreted the rules a certain way, where actually as an official, the response would be different. So I like to give teams the opportunity to discuss situations with me that they may have been training for some kind of sneaky loophole things, so I can be clear just from an officiating perspective, how will we respond to that situation if we see it?
Cool. Can you say that again about who can call a timeout or a team timeout or an official review? It's the captain or the alternate. In terms of officials who can sign for it to be called, actually any skating official or jam timer and who's so can call for it. Often it's the jam, you leave it to the jam timer, but actually sometimes they miss it or something happens, and any official, I hope I don't regret saying this, any official with a whistle really can call it off and acknowledge it, but often the jam timer is the person who should be most aware that they're calling a timeout. Would you just say skater return to bench? So this is the example we did earlier when there was a skater who was injured and had returned to the track too early, would you say skater return to bench, or would you add that they are not eligible for the jam? Do you give reasons for that instruction? Tem?
I think it would depend how much time is left at the point that I realize it. If they line up within the first few seconds of the lineup time, and I recognize that skater is the one that was off for injury. Particularly, it happens a lot with jammers who are injured, and as a jam referee, knowing what jam that jammer's allowed to come back is sometimes information that I have very, very quickly. And in that situation, I would just speak to that skater. I would get their attention with their color and number, and then I would literally just say, jam 23 was called off for injury. You can't jam in this jam. I would try and be as clear as possible, give them all the information, and just so there's no confusion. If I just say return to bench, they're looking at me like, why should I? And then they're looking around to try and see whether there's another jammer or if there's someone in the box. And if they think I'm wrong because they can see that there isn't a jammer in the box, then maybe they'll stay on the track because they think I'm giving them wrong information. So the more precise I can be about why, the better if there's time to do it. Now, if there's only a few seconds left in the lineup time, just saying very firmly, color, number, return to bench. Usually skaters will just do what you tell them to, but I think it's valuable to give as much information as you can if you have the time to do so.
We've had some clarifications in the chat around earlier when we were talking about team timeouts and official reviews. So a coach can be your alternate. They can definitely have the A on it, but right now you can have teams who have up to 4 bench staff on their thing, and not all of them can do it. So it can be a coach. It can also be players, but it has to be whoever has the A on them and whoever has the C on them can call it. So I thought about players that might be hard of hearing or something similar, and was wondering if there are things officials can do to make sure they are better able to include them and avoid having them not hear penalty calls. What suggestions do you have? So there are a few things. I think it still happens in the captain's meeting. You'll ask if people are hard of hearing, but actually a lot of the time, the reason you'll ask for that is not, it shouldn't really be for the skating officials. The skating officials should be loud and making eye contact and reflecting. It's actually really important for the NSOs, because if you're in a penalty box and someone's hard of hearing and you're saying red 3-1 done or stand, because actually, sorry, I'll start again. When you're in the penalty box, as we went over in week 1, you sit down. You sit down for 20 seconds, then an NSO will say color, number, stand. Once the full 30 seconds has gone, they'll say color, number, done. There are hand signals that go with that to try and show that visually, but for some hard of hearing skaters, they might also want a tap on the shoulder. Generally, officials touching skaters is something that doesn't really happen very much anymore. Like it used to be that a lot of NSOs would just kind of tap people to be like, stand. That's usually done now with really explicit consent from the hard of hearing skater, who might want that more physical touch in order to know when to stand and when to leave. The other thing is for jam timers, people will emphasize the whistle a lot, and they'll forget that they've blown a whistle and then their hand goes down. But for hard of hearing skaters, they're not hearing your whistle. They're looking for your hand and they're looking for that to go down. So having a good jam time is important. If you know someone is hard of hearing, it's become more common practice to really encourage the team to be here listening out, and for officials to be upping their game when it comes to the level of their voice and making sure they've had eye contact and really trying to call. Tem, do you have anything else for hard of hearing skaters?
Yes, I have a few things. This is a subject that's very important to me. And similarly to how Dahlia was saying, I don't think it's particularly good practice for us all to get together in a captain's meeting and list all the people that have various disabilities and accommodations, because that's not really appropriate in terms of inclusion. And it has kind of become a means to an end in terms of how people get the accommodations they need. What I tend to do in captain's meetings is say very explicitly, here are the things that we'll do. For example, the NSOs in the penalty box, because they're standing behind the skaters who are in the penalty box, will by default use a hand signal that passes in front of the chair and is visible to a skater. If you have any skaters on your team who require a different accommodation, you don't need to tell us why. Tell us who and tell us what it is they need. I'm more interested in what people need than what conditions a person has. as a disabled official myself. I also think there are a couple of other things that you kind of would just say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're including this thing. We're going to make eye contact with every skater before we issue an insubordination penalty. We're going to make sure that we're in front of a skater who's skating forward. That's the main thing. As a jammer referee, if you're chasing a skater who is faster than you and who is ahead of you, and you're trying to tell them that they did a penalty in the middle of the pack, if they're deaf or hard of hearing and they can't hear you, you're not in position from behind them to be yelling at them and then also be giving them an insubordination penalty. It's your responsibility as a jammer referee to get up and in front of that skater in their line of sight and to then communicate a penalty very clearly before you issue an insubordination penalty. The other thing, and one of the main accommodations that I've seen for hard of hearing skaters specifically, is when you echo the call-off signals as a jammer referee. Now, this is an issue for me because there still isn't an actual solution for it. But usually what happens is the jammer referee of the jammer who is calling the jam does this for the first set of 4 whistles, and everyone joins in for the next 2. And the jammer referee for the jammer who is not lead jammer does not move their arms at all. And that's so it's clear which jammer called it off. However, if you're not lead jammer and you are deaf or hard of hearing and you're approaching the pack very quickly toward the end of the jam and you really want those last points and your jammer referee is giving no indication that the jam has ended, making late contact if you can't hear the whistles because there's no official near you who is giving the jam is over signal is a real thing that happens a lot. So it's very important for a jammer referee that if a skater requests this as an accommodation, that the jammer referee of a not lead jammer echoes the end of the jam. Now, there is a bit of an issue in that you wouldn't start echoing until actually after the jam has ended, because the jam ends on the 4th whistle of the first set. So you kind of need to be as on it as possible. This comes back to what we were saying about like anticipating the game flow, being prepared. When are the jammers racing? When is it likely that the other jammer is going to call it off? Am I in the right position to get this jammer's attention so that ideally I can hit my hips on that 4th whistle? It's really tough, but it's the only way to communicate very clearly and physically that the jam has ended to a hard of hearing skater.
Okay, so another question. If swearing is against the rules, what if players talk different languages? How will it be known if they're using bad language? So it's interesting. Swearing isn't intrinsically against the rules. There's a casebook scenario where it says like if they're swearing to themselves and no one else can hear, like explicitly like the audience can't hear, the other team can't hear, and it's very much it's directed to them. Have some flexibility with that. If people can start hearing it, you talk to the skater or you talk to their bench coach. So that's also another thing for a head ref. I've been in situations where teams have been playing from many different countries and they have been swearing, and then eventually what often happens is the other team will come up and say, this is what we're hearing, it's in another language, I speak that language, because often other teams assume that no one else speaks that language, could you have a word? Often if you feel like the game's getting hectic anyways, you go and speak to a bench coach and say, we've had reports that there's been some swearing, it's not appropriate, can you please have a word with your team? And often they will. Bench coaches don't want to upset, annoy, agitate the officials. It does not help them. And also, a lot of bench coaches really understand that kind of behavior is stuff they've probably been working on, if that's something that happens quite commonly. But if it does happen, if the swearing kind of continues, or it's explicitly towards another skater on their own team or on the opposing team, right? So that's actually one of those interesting rules where it's really explicit, like if it's their team or the other team, or an official or the audience member, then that should be a penalty. So once again, there is a level of discretion here that you have to take into consideration. And at juniors games, no swearing. It's not okay. That's not a thing at juniors.
also just in terms of whether you understand a language or not, or whether you can hear or not. It's, you can direct abusive language at someone who doesn't understand what you're saying to them. The manner in which language is delivered and the aggression and so on, in the tone of delivery, in the physical delivery of words, in the volume, in all of the rest, it is often quite possible to tell when someone is being aggressive or abusive in a language, even if no one witnessing it speaks it. So it's a judgment call, but it's very possible.
Another question. I thought that presenting a head, even without impact, as a target so that someone can't get around you would count as a head block. Or is it always a misconduct? Tem.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
I thought that presenting a head, your head, even if it has no impact, as a target, so that someone can't get around you without hitting your head, would count as a head block. Or is it always misconduct?
It is always misconduct. The head block, in order for something to be penalized as a head block, there needs to be contact with the head. And the reason that a misconduct penalty is more appropriate here is because there is no contact. It's not a contact penalty, and there are no contact penalties for positional blocks. So all positional blocks that have impact on the game, they're generally things like positionally blocking a down skater, positionally blocking an out of bounds skater from re-entering the track, positioning your head in front of someone so that they can't pass you. So there's no contact penalty because there is no contact, but it is a misconduct penalty for unsporting conduct.
Cool. Could you go through a bit more about the difference between a sanction game and any other type? Tam, do you want to get that one?
Yeah, sure. So really the main difference is that if a game is sanctioned by any governing body, it means that that game counts for rankings according to whatever system that governing body is using. So for WFTDA sanctioned games, if a game is sanctioned, it means that the result of that game will contribute to the rankings of the teams involved. Now, there are various policies and so on that have a different level of rigor depending on whether or not a game is sanctioned. So when a game counts for a charter team's rankings, it tends to be considered more important to those teams in terms of whether everything is accurate, because obviously sometimes games end with a 1 point difference, and if things are not very clear, if things haven't been handled to the appropriate level of thoroughness, the ranking shifts can make a really big difference. So sanctioning is specifically about rankings. There is a special kind of sort of sanction game called a strength factor challenge game, which is where it only counts for the rankings of one team. So one team challenges another team, and it is sanctioned as far as officiating goes. If you're an official, the idea about sanctioning is all the same. But in terms of the rankings result, only the team that is making the challenge, so of a team with a higher ranking, it means that the team with a lower ranking is able to reset or elevate their ranking based on their performance in that game without the more higher ranked team having to sacrifice their own ranking points, which is a situation that often happens with geographical disparity. For historically, South American and European teams, for example, and teams in Australia and New Zealand have been very underranked based on what kind of games they can get. So that's something that's the Strength Factor Challenge idea was made to fix.
The other thing I'd say about sanctioned games and regulations games as an official is you're so often doing them in order to get to different tournaments. For some of the higher level tournaments, you will only really be considered if you have quite a few sanctioned games. And the kind of playoffs and continental cups and champs, the WFTDA kind of the end of season tournaments, you only get if you've officiated numbers of sanctioned games. And the reason I'm saying that is because actually it then creates kind of a fatigue for all the other kinds of games if you are someone who's really kind of trying to get all of those sanctioned games in. And it means that the lower level games, the challenge games, all those things often don't get the higher level officials. And then often that means that people end up framing a lower level game as a game where it's anyone can do it. If I officiate, when I was a newer official and I officiated challenge games and lower level games, I always asked who the head ref was and who the other experienced officials are. And the reason I asked that is because I was once or twice, more than that, put in positions when I was a very, very fresh ref as being the most experienced person there. And, you know, kind of that leadership quote of, you know, you want to be in a room of people smarter than you. I wanted to be in a room full of officials who could help me grow and give me that feedback that I needed. And I think for the odd game, that's okay. But it's really important as well that leagues try to reach out, and it can be so hard. So I'm not saying that they don't try, because honestly, like the fatigue of some officials is real, and it's fair for them to say no. But to try and get that mixture of experienced and refreshed officials, it can be really helpful. So next question. When you mentioned that a skater from another team impersonating an NSO and getting a skater on the other team to leave the box early, does the skater who left early have to return to the box for the rest of their penalty? Is this the same if there's only about a second left, for example? Is there any discretion on that? Tem, do you know the answer, or do you want me to say something?
I'm happy to answer this one if you want me to. So the skater who left early would have to finish their penalty, however long is remaining on their, whether that's 1 second, half a second, 10 seconds, anything. However, they would not be issued an additional penalty for leaving early, and the skater who impersonated the official would be penalised for misconduct. So just as in a situation where an official mistakenly dismisses someone early or anything, if there is penalty time to be sat, it must be sat.
We've had one question going, what are the hand signals for the penalty box? So for that, I'm going to hand over to Holtz, who is LRD's head NSO. So if you start talking, people should be able to see you.
Let's give this a go. Hello, everybody. Lovely to meet you. I've been one of the moderators for the ref school so far. There is, as far as I'm aware, there is no standardized in the rules hand signals for the penalty box. But there is what is generally used. I've never seen anybody use anything other than these hand signals, which is when you say stand, you do this. And when you say done, you do this. So that's from the side, that's stand and done. It's important to make sure that when your hands are going up and out, that your hands are in front of the skater's like head positioning, because you will be behind them. They might not be looking at you, that's fine, that's their decision, but you have to at least give them the opportunity of noticing your hand signals. So that will be color number stand and color number done. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much, that's great. I think we probably have time for like 2 more questions. So we'll go with, is there anything you can do about a bench coach that is being really loud and aggressive towards the refs? The type of yelling like, come on, that was totally a back block, and other disruptive and rude behavior. Tem, any thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a tough one. A lot of coaches kind of have that coaching style, and if they're not being abusive, so that quote, come on, that was definitely a back block, is not very nice. Doesn't make me want to, you know, hang out socially with that person. They're not particularly respectful, but it doesn't cross a line for me, depending on the context and situation, and whether or not it's very specifically directed at an individual and with what tone. But for me, that situation doesn't seem to cross a line. Like, I don't like that it's happening, but I wouldn't penalize for it. Now, if it's something that becomes a real habit, what I would usually try and do is informally, rather than try and do any kind of warning, because if someone already has this antagonistic relationship with the officials, saying to them, I need you to stop doing that or we will issue penalties for this, just aggravates the situation. And what I would rather do is chat to that person. Say, you know, what feedback do you have? Usually, if they've been yelling about things that they don't like, then they'll use that opportunity to say, well, this was doing this back block and they didn't catch this, and then we're doing catch this, and then we're doing that. And then if I can take that opportunity to respond by saying, yep, I'll take those things on board. I think some of the way that yourself and the skaters are communicating with the officials is potentially rattling them a little bit, and it makes it harder for them to be accurate in these ways that you're asking for. So you can help us to help you by, you know, reining it in a little bit. There are lots of ways that you can chat to people a lot more casually, and it really depends on your judgment about what's appropriate. Sometimes everything I just said there, I wouldn't dream of saying to a coach, because letting some coaches know that their behavior is rattling your officials is the absolute opposite of constructive, because they're just going to amp it up and do it more, because some bench coaches actually, you know, actively believe that the chaos of a crew that is confused and rattled is better for them than a crew that's on it. So you really just kind of have to try and assess the interpersonal politics of the situation. But yeah, if something is unpleasant but doesn't cross the line for penalization, chatting about it, trying to build rapport, trying to build a relationship in which there isn't an antagonism, in which you can just kind of, we're all here to play the game. You're not happy right now. How can I fix that for you? Okay, thank you. You can help us to fix that for you. Just trying to work together.
And Tem, who would you penalise if, let's say, for example, you actually ended up having to expel them because they were swearing, they were being very personal, they were running into the track? Who would you end up penalising?
The penalty would go to the captain. If a non-skater that is on a team's staff it is issued a penalty for misconduct or interference with the flow of the game, or any kind of action, to be honest, the penalty would go to the captain.
Yeah, and just to kind of end, someone said, going back to that first question of what qualities, I'm getting that emotional intelligence is way up there. I think emotional intelligence is really good for very many officials. Not all officials have it, and actually not all officials need it. Some officials' roles, which is I think a glorious thing about roller derby, is they are very matter-of-fact, practical. And then when it's not the way you expect it to be, there is someone else who can ask that question too. I think with skating officiating, emotional intelligence is important, because there is that level of, should I go and explain that penalty? That person looked agitated, and right now, is it the moment to give them a bit more understanding, or is it not? I think as a head ref, emotional intelligence is really important, and being able to communicate to the best of your ability. But you learn that over time, and like all these things, you will have sessions where you're like, oh, I said that thing, I thought I was being helpful, I wasn't. And that's okay. I think with head reffing, as Tem said, like building up that relationship and having that communication can really help calm. But also it is something that you have to either try and get used to in some ways, because as Tem said, some of it is not abusive, it's just not behavior you usually get in your day-to-day life. Or head reffing may not be the thing that you want to do, and there are other ways that you can have leadership roles within roller derby and within officiating without having to worry that every 2 minutes at most you're going to have two people walking up to you and saying things in a way that might rattle you a bit. And sometimes they're saying it intentionally in that way, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes the more you get to know someone, you're like, oh, this is just how you react in roller derby. On that note, it is 4:32, so this is over for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week, where we are going to be going into more in-depth scenarios and have quite a few other officials guesting with us to help out. And so we hope that breakout rooms will work for us. See ya. Bye.